Here's something almost nobody tells you about your kidneys. By the time a blood test flags a problem, you have likely already lost a significant chunk of kidney function that you will never get back. Not months of warning, years. And the reason has almost nothing to do with the supplement someone is trying to sell you in a video description. Your kidneys are two fist-sized organs, but they run a factory that filters your entire blood volume dozens of times a day, removing waste, balancing fluid, and controlling blood pressure. When that filtering system gets damaged, it doesn't announce itself. It quietly compensates, absorbing the damage and carrying on, right up until it can't anymore. So what's actually driving that slow, invisible damage in millions of people who feel completely fine? It comes down to a hormone most people only associate with diabetes, insulin. And once you understand what chronically elevated insulin is doing inside your kidneys, the everyday choices that protect them start to make a lot more sense. Insulin's most famous job is moving sugar out of your bloodstream and into your cells after a meal. That part is accurate, but insulin also has receptors scattered throughout nearly every tissue in the body, including the kidneys, and its effects there rarely make it into the conversation. When insulin stays elevated for months or years at a time, three things tend to happen inside the body. First, it signals the kidneys to hang on to more sodium, and water follows sodium, so fluid builds up and blood volume rises. Second, it activates the sympathetic nervous system, your fight-or-flight circuitry, which tightens blood vessels and pushes blood pressure up further. Third, and this is the part that matters most for long-term kidney health, it raises the pressure inside the glomeruli, the microscopic filtering units that do the actual work of cleaning your blood. Those filtering units are extremely sensitive to pressure. Keep them under sustained strain for years, and scar tissue starts to form. Once a glomerulus scar's over, it's gone permanently. Your kidneys don't grow new ones to replace it, which is exactly why chronic insulin elevation is so consequential, even though it rarely produces any symptoms you would notice. This is precisely why kidney disease is often described as a silent condition. Early on, there's usually no pain, no obvious change in how you feel, and nothing that would prompt a trip to the doctor. Some people eventually notice subtle signs, like feeling more tired than usual, mild swelling around the ankles or eyes, or foamy urine caused by protein leaking through a damaged filter. But these signs typically only appear once a meaningful amount of function has already been lost, which is exactly why routine screening, rather than waiting for symptoms, matters so much for anyone with risk factors like high blood pressure, obesity, or a family history of diabetes. Diabetes, particularly type 2, represents years of insulin resistance reaching a tipping point, and it is one of the leading causes of chronic kidney disease worldwide. In the UK specifically, diabetes is responsible for roughly a third of new cases needing dialysis or a transplant, according to Kidney Research UK and Diabetes UK. And here's the detail that gets missed constantly. The kidney damage doesn't start on the day someone is diagnosed with diabetes. It typically begins during the years of elevated insulin that come before that diagnosis, sometimes a decade or more in advance. But here's what most people don't realize. Insulin levels are not fixed the way kidney tissue damage is. They shift hour to hour depending entirely on what you eat. A meal loaded with refined carbohydrates triggers a sharp insulin spike. A meal built around protein, fat, fiber, and slower digesting carbohydrates produces a far gentler response. Which means the pressure inside those delicate filtering units, the actual physiological stress your kidneys are under, is something you influence multiple times a day, not something locked in by genetics or age. That's the real foundation of everything that follows. Nobody can regenerate scarred kidney tissue through diet alone, and anyone claiming otherwise is not being straight with you. What you can do, starting with your very next meal, is change the environment your kidneys are operating in and reduce the pressure they're under. That shift begins within hours, not years. So let's get into what that actually looks like in practice, because this is usually where health content either turns vague or turns into a sales pitch for a powder. The first and highest leverage change is cutting out liquid sugar entirely. This deserves to be first because people consistently underestimate how much damage it causes relative to how easy it is to fix. Fruit juice belongs on this list. even though it still gets marketed as a health drink. Once juice is squeezed, the fiber that would have slowed sugar absorption is gone, leaving you with something that behaves in your bloodstream almost like a can of soda. The same goes for energy drinks, sweetened coffees, flavored waters, sodas, and yes, smoothies too. Blending fruit doesn't destroy the sugar, and pulverizing the fiber structure removes most of its protective slowing effect, so a smoothie can spike your blood sugar nearly as fast as juice does. This is where things become really important. Liquid sugar produces the fastest, sharpest insulin spike of any food category because there's no fiber, protein, or fat slowing its path into your bloodstream. Swap those drinks for water, sparkling water, black coffee, or unsweetened tea, and you will meaningfully lower your daily insulin load before you've changed a single meal. The second shift is restructuring meals, so protein and fiber come first, ahead of refined carbohydrates. Most Western meals are built carbohydrate first. Cereal, toast, a sandwich, a bowl of pasta with something on top. The problem isn't only what's in those foods, it's the order they hit your digestive system. Eating protein and fiber before carbohydrate slows gastric emptying and meaningfully blunts the glucose and insulin spike that follows. In practice, that might mean eggs with spinach and avocado for breakfast, or full-fat, unsweetened Greek yogurt with nuts and berries, rather than cereal or granola eaten alone, both of which tend to spike insulin sharply, despite their health food reputation. Many people overlook this simple detail. The order you eat food within a single meal matters almost as much as what's on the plate, so eating a few bites of protein or vegetables before touching the rice, bread, or pasta on the same plate can soften the spike even when the meal itself doesn't change. For lunch and dinner, start with a protein source, whether that's chicken, fish, eggs, or tofu. Build the plate around a generous portion of vegetables. And if you're including carbohydrates, favor fiber-rich options like lentils, quinoa, or sweet potato over white bread, white rice, or plain pasta. The third piece is time-restricted eating, and the surprising part is how little you actually have to change to see a benefit. Stop eating roughly 3 hours before bed, and if it's realistic for you, push your first meal slightly later in the morning. This isn't about skipping meals or forcing hunger. It's about giving your kidneys a genuine stretch of the day where insulin is low and they're not under sustained pressure. Research on time-restricted eating patterns, even without any change to what people actually eat, has shown measurable reductions in blood pressure and improvements in insulin sensitivity within days. The mechanism is straightforward. More hours spent with low circulating insulin means more hours those filtering units spend operating under reduced strain. The fourth step is one of the simplest interventions in all of metabolic health, and it's genuinely well supported by research. Walk after you eat. A 20 to 30 minute walk is ideal, but even 5 to 10 minutes measurably helps. Walking activates muscle contractions that pull glucose out of the bloodstream and into muscle tissue through a pathway that partly bypasses insulin altogether. That means your body clears the post-meal glucose spike without needing nearly as much insulin to do it, which directly reduces the oxidative stress that repeated glucose spikes place on the small blood vessels inside the kidney. This effect shows up consistently across studies on post-meal walking, and while shorter walks help, longer ones tend to produce a larger benefit. It doesn't need to be intense. This isn't about a workout or breaking a sweat. A relaxed, ordinary walk around the block is enough to trigger the effect, which is part of why it's one of the easiest habits to actually sustain long-term. Timing also seems to matter more than people expect. A walk taken within the first hour after eating tends to blunt the glucose spike more effectively than the same walk taken several hours later, simply because you're intervening while glucose is still actively entering the bloodstream. The fifth piece is hydration, and this is where a persistent myth needs correcting. There's a widespread belief that more water is always better for your kidneys, that you need to constantly flush your system with 3 or 4 liters a day no matter what. That's not accurate, and in people who already have reduced kidney function, drastically overloading on fluid can actually be dangerous because struggling kidneys may not be able to excrete the excess. In rare but serious cases, that kind of overhydration can cause dangerously low blood sodium, a condition that needs medical attention. What your kidneys actually need is steady, adequate perfusion, meaning you're simply not dehydrated. For most adults with typical activity levels, somewhere in the range of 2 to 3 liters a day from all fluids, including water, milk, coffee, and tea, is a reasonable target, adjusted upward if you're more active or in a hot climate. Rather than obsessively tracking ounces, a simpler and more reliable gauge is the color of your urine. Pale yellow generally indicates you're well hydrated. Dark yellow suggests you need more fluid. Completely clear, all day, every day, can be a sign you're overdoing it, and alcohol doesn't count toward hydration at all. It's a diuretic, which means it actively pulls fluid out of your system. Now here's what changes once you actually put these pieces together. Within hours of cutting back on refined carbohydrates and liquid sugar, insulin levels begin to fall. As that happens, the signal telling your kidneys to retain sodium weakens, so they start excreting more sodium in water, blood volume drops slightly, and blood pressure often eases a few points, an effect that tends to be more noticeable in people whose baseline insulin was already running high. The sympathetic nervous system settles down too, pressure inside the glomeruli decreases, and the oxidative stress generated by sharp glucose spikes is reduced or avoided altogether. None of that will show up as a dramatic shift on a lab report after a single day, and it shouldn't be presented as though it will. But it is real, measurable at the physiological level, and it represents a genuine reduction in the daily load your kidneys are carrying. Kidney health isn't decided by any single day or any single meal. It's shaped by accumulated pressure on delicate tissue across years and decades. Consistently lowering that pressure week after week is what actually changes the long-term trajectory, not a powder, a detox tea, or a proprietary blend with a doctor's face on the label. To be clear about what's realistic here, none of this reverses years of existing kidney damage in a day, and no honest source would claim it does. What it does is change the environment your kidneys operate in, starting with your very next meal, and given enough consistency, that adds up to something substantial. If you have existing kidney disease, diabetes, or any condition affecting fluid or sodium balance, these general principles should be discussed with your own doctor before making major changes, since individual needs can vary considerably. The pattern worth remembering is this: the interventions with the strongest evidence behind them are rarely the exciting ones. Cutting liquid sugar, reordering your plate, giving your body a real eating window, walking after meals, and drinking enough without overdoing it. Boring, repeatable, and free. And that's really the theme underneath all of this. Populations around the world known for living long, healthy lives don't rely on supplements, cleanses, or proprietary formulas to protect their kidneys or anything else. They tend to eat real food, move regularly throughout the day, stop eating before it's late at night, and stay reasonably hydrated without overthinking it. None of that fits neatly into a product label, which is probably part of why it gets so little attention compared to whatever's being marketed in a video description. None of these 5 habits require a gym membership, a subscription, or a single purchase. What they require is consistency, applied over months and years rather than a single dramatic weekend. Pick one to start with if all 5 feels like too much at once. Cutting liquid sugar tends to produce the fastest, most noticeable shift for most people, so it's a reasonable place to begin if you're not sure where else to start. Add the next habit once the first one feels automatic, rather than trying to overhaul everything on day one. Your kidneys will keep quietly filtering your blood whether you think about them or not, absorbing whatever load you place on them for as long as they possibly can. The question worth sitting with isn't whether you can undo years of strain overnight, because you can't, and no one honestly can. It's whether you're willing to lower the pressure on them starting today, consistently, in ways that don't cost anything and don't depend on anyone else's product. That, more than anything sold in a bottle, is what actually protects the 2 organs quietly doing this work right now.